This panel is, I think, a neat agenda item. It's different, obviously, from most of the things that have happened today because our panelists are non-milestone people. So no special agenda, really, and really the $50,000 speaking fees we paid each one of them have really no bearing on anything that they'll say all day.
Has the check cleared yet?
As their name tags say, they really are distinguished panelists. They were selected actually before I arrived on the scene, but as it turns out, I know them both. Robert Cole and Tim Peter are their names. Robert and I worked together in a past life, actually a long time ago, and Tim I met through his wife, who I worked with, his wife Tammy, who I worked with in a couple of past lives. And Tammy is really much nicer and much smarter than Tim, but she was not available for this panel.
All true.
So we asked Tim to join instead. So we're happy to have these guys here. I'm going to let them go through their backgrounds. I'll say briefly, Robert is the founder of something called Rock Cheetah, which I'll let him explain. He's also a senior analyst a senior research analyst with Focusrite. Tim is a longtime industry figure and industry consultant and is the founder of his firm, which is called, cleverly, Tim Peter and Associates. The format here is very simple. I'm going to ask the questions. They're going to provide the answers. Then we're going to ask you to vote on who answered best in each case. And at the end, we're going to tally up the votes, and the winner is going to become Benu's permanent assistant.
Really?
Not really. I'll ask the questions. They'll provide the answers. It's not really more complicated than that. Right. No, they don't want that job, really. Okay, so you guys are mic'd up.
We are. We're all set.
You guys are mic'd up. So, Robert, why don't you take 60 seconds max or so and take everybody through your background first, and then, Tim, maybe you can do the same thing, okay?
Not a problem. I'm Robert Cole, founder of Rock Cheetah. I'm very old. I've done a lot of things. Spent 8 years with Four Seasons Hotels, ran their marketing planning operation corporately. Also worked at Sabre, ran their hotel program for a number of years in the late 90s, launching Travelocity, Business Travel Solutions, those sorts of things. Skipped over Travel Resources Management Group where Chris and I crossed paths, as well as Tammy, which was a little startup we did in the early 90s to represent independent hotels. We went from one property to about 300, sold it to Anasazi. And then after Sabre, wound up starting up Neat Group, which was the first dynamic packaging company. So we ran around the travel industry explaining what dynamic packaging was, got the US patent on it, sold that to Sendent, and then started my own consulting business. And I've been doing that since 2004. Took a 3-year break to work with a client, Mark Travel, ran all of their basically non-air contracting and product things for that. So done a lot of different things in the industry, and currently I work with a lot of major hotel groups, different travel technology providers, and spend a bunch of time writing things for Focusrite. So I'm just involved in a content, or actually a channel optimization strategy paper, and just finished a white paper for T-News on rate parity, on the wars between the OTAs and the hotel brands on rate parity, which should be getting published in the next week or two, I think.
So my name is Tim Peter. I am the founder and president of Tim Peter and Associates, which, funny story, I'd actually had a blog for years on the domain timpeter.com, which I bought back in the 90s so that I could have the email address, tim@timpeter.com. And since we've done so much talk about search today, when I founded the company, I realized I was getting so much search traffic coming in from all the blog articles that I've written that it made no sense to come up with a different name and try to build that brand from scratch. Thus, that's where the company name comes from. But prior to that, I've been doing this for about 5 years with my company. Prior to that, I spent a bunch of years with the leading hotels of the world and ran all digital for them globally. I spent 6 years with what is today Wyndham Worldwide, but was only that for the last 9 months I was there. It was Sendent Hotel Group for the first 6 years that I worked there, ran digital for them. I spent the dot-com boom working for Charles Schwab, sorting out all kinds of different roles. They are all in the digital space and the like. And I actually started my career in the music industry, which, makes no sense to anybody ever, but that's okay. We can talk about it over drinks. I work with hotel groups, primarily independents, a bunch of management companies and folks like that, about 50 hotels or so. That's about half my business. I also work with clients like IBM and Pearson Publishing, as well as some agencies and folks along those lines, primarily service industry folks, on digital strategy and how you make digital put more business in your business. So that's what I do.
Great. Okay, so these guys, by the way, also do a regularly scheduled BLAB cast together. And maybe if we have some time at the end, you guys can give us 30 or 60 seconds on that as well.
Sure.
There's probably people in the room who listen to it and attend, I would imagine. So the questions that I picked today for Robert and Tim, it's probably good that this part of the agenda is at the end of the day, and we take no offense that everybody was just waving off the timekeepers, not empathizing, to use John Wallace's word, with the guys at the end of the agenda. But it's the questions that we picked for the two guys are really questions that go back over, to a degree, some of the things that have been discussed during the day. So I'm first going to ask Robert and then Tim to just grab one question and just talk about it on his own. So, Robert, perhaps you could discuss what you believe will be the major motivator of change in the digital landscape for hospitality and how this will change the status quo today.
Absolutely. Off the top of my head, I'll just do these 3 slides that I've worked up. So we've talked a lot today about all sorts of things for being planned. You look, all these terrific tools that Milestone's put together of analyzing your competitive set, putting together structure of your site, and then you have something like this happen, which is a snowstorm, which you can't really predict. You don't know when it's going to happen. And so what I think the big change is personalization, and certainly we've talked a lot about it, but cover 3 particular aspects of it. Give some highlights of it. I call it the virtuous cycle of behavioral analytics. And I wrote a paper now, well, a couple of years ago, I guess, for Focusrite on the impact of big data and semantic analysis on the travel industry. And what's happening now, and unfortunately we didn't talk to the hotel companies or the airlines, that was intentional. We talked to the intermediaries who are spending very big money on this stuff and have become quite expert. But what happens now, as opposed to all the demographics and things like that, in many cases they just say, forget it. Let's just look at what's happened. And all of a sudden you take the case of, here's what was booked, here's what happened, and then work it up the funnel, and then you target what was at the top of the funnel. So, snowstorm hits the Northeast, and I don't know, somebody used an example of an all-inclusive Jamaican resort, something like that, terrific. That happens, you go through, you find all the historic browsing navigation patterns, you've got it worked up. Lots of multivariate testing, and this is where things get very, very complicated, because intuitively you might say that X beats Y. Good. We'd definitely use that. You'd normally use X, and you go, oh, an A beats B, so would you always use A. But for some reason, Y and B combination works better. And you don't know why, it's just how it works. And when you talk to a lot of these people, if you talk to Expedia's CIO and CTO, as I did for about 90 minutes, which was fantastic, they will tell you that they are just scratching the surface right now. They aren't developing answers, they're figuring out what questions to ask. So you can then do a lot of things with personas, things like that, because you're developing signals to figure out what happens. You start drilling that backwards. Then you can start adapting your ad creative, things like that. Again, testing all the way through. And when you test this and it works with the next snowstorm, all of a sudden you get a bunch of data, which then helps you the next round around. So in certain cases, they are taking this where they say, great, a snowstorm hits on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, and this is purely hypothetical. Wednesday, Thursday, don't do anything. Just nothing happens going. But if, say, your Jamaican resort, maybe Riu, on Friday evenings, that's when conversion opportunities at more moderate, sort of all-inclusive resorts really occur. Boom, beef up your ad spend on that, bid higher, because that's when you really want the traffic. And if you're Sandals or something like that, or Hedonism, maybe that's Sunday morning. but they're getting to that level of sophistication. It's very, very complicated, and it takes a lot of big data. And unfortunately, for even the major hotel companies, if you're Hilton or Marriott, there's so much data that these guys have, cross-brand, cross-destination, that actually the Hiltons and Marriotts are at a disadvantage as well. So it's a daunting task, but that is what then drills down to really true personalized advertising. So you've got all this data. What's the next one? Well, you wind up with machine learning. And with this could be an entire couple of days probably. But I thought I'd just give a few examples. The one interesting thing about all of these examples, though, is they're all now fairly open sourced, where you can get, the developers can use it, and you can contribute your data into these. And so all of a sudden, the machine learning algorithms are very, very large. So as opposed to kind of earlier, 2 years ago, everyone had their own thing, right? IBM's working on Watson, and they're beating Jeopardy, and they're tuning this thing and figuring out this great machine learning language. Now all of a sudden, because of, as we said, the semantic schema, those sorts of things, all these contextual relationships, the more relationships you have, the more data you have, the better everything gets. So all of a sudden, you've got IBM with Watson, and unless I think the links will work, I'm not sure. We'll see if they came through with the PDF. If not, email me, robert@rockcheetah.com or @RobertKCole on any social media. But the other interesting thing is through all of these, so IBM with Watson, what did they do? They started out by playing Jeopardy, something that people can relate to, something that people aren't afraid of. Because if you really get into it, it can be very scary. Google started with TensorFlow. They started with first cat videos, but TensorFlow is what beat Go, right? I mean, it used to identify cat videos, which when you think about it is kind of hard. If you're a computer just looking at some video, figure, is that a cat or not? That's a fairly decent challenge. But now all of a sudden, 37 million moves analyzed and things like that, and it can regularly beat the champion. Microsoft has their cognitive services. They started with celebrity, what celebrity do you look like, sort of thing, looking at facial recognition features. Facebook has FAIR, great thing. Photo captions for the blind, right? No tagging, even in just images where nobody has tagged the content with alt text or anything like that. Here's what the pictures are. Tremendous opportunities. Amazon has it with Destiny. That's how you pronounce that little thing there. Their product recommendation engines, which were built off of the collaborative filtering engine developed at the University of Minnesota way back in the 90s. Yes, you can tap into that now, and all of that knowledge and expertise that has been developed by the machine learning algorithm you can tap into. And then finally, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel have OpenAI, which is basically pulling all of these different machine learning aspects together, basically a schema of all of these schemas. So all of a sudden you start networking all of this stuff together to get even more information. So earth-shaking. So these machines are going to know a lot about you through all of these different things because you use all of these different, you use Google for all sorts of stuff. You use Facebook all the time for social. You shop on Amazon. All that understanding and knowledge of your behaviors and what you do, when you start tapping into that, and the first thing we talked about, what are your actual behaviors after a snowstorm when you're in the Northeast and you're fed up and you want to go hit a beach, all of a sudden the machines can start figuring out probably what you're going to do, maybe before you even realize what you want to do. And then finally, your awesome personal assistant. And there are a variety of them. So Apple, everyone, how many people have iPhones versus Androids? Well, it's pretty good, yeah. Pretty good split. I'm an Android guy, it's okay. But Siri's, great. My wife, daughters use it continuously. I'm an Android guy, so I use Google Now, outrageously helpful. But it gives me answers to questions that I don't even ask. It tells me driving routes to different places. If I regularly go on a particular time or date, it will suddenly give me driving directions. I don't even ask it for it. It just contributes it to me because it goes, oh, you always go to this place now. You go to church on Sunday or something. Boom, here are the driving directions and the traffic patterns for it. Microsoft has Cortana. It's interesting because it works across all Windows 10 devices, so it's a little bit different from the more mobile-oriented Apple and Google products. Facebook has M, which again is amazing in terms of what it does, but they have trainers. They have large staff, I don't know the numbers of people, who are really working to make the answers better. They're almost assistants. You can go in and ask it questions, and for certain things, it will find solutions for you. Again, storing all of that information in the back until they have enough information where they can cut the humans out of the loop. Kind of the Uber approach, right? Until Uber gets self-driving cars, all those Uber drivers are going to be looking for work. So, Amazon has Alexa. Anyone have an Echo at home? Do you love your Echoes?
Love it.
Yeah, everybody I know loves the Echo. Same thing, but it'll do alarms, it'll call music, you can talk to it. Again, all voice-based. And then the big one, anyone heard of Viv? Okay, one person, that's great. There's a video on Viv, we don't have a link there, but look it up. It's the guys who created Siri. And Viv is Siri on steroids. Their original vision for Siri was not to just have it work in the Apple environment, it was to be cross-platform. But when they sold to Apple and Apple gave them a big check, they got over that real quick. So that's fine. But then they went out and worked on Viv. What Viv does to personal assistant, it's very, very smart, but it's so smart it writes its own code. So in the video, it's about a 30-minute video, they go and give it an example. They're searching for something very specific, like what's the temperature going to be tomorrow afternoon in San Francisco near the Golden Gate Bridge or something, just convoluted question. And all of a sudden, boom, they show how it works. It's written 44 lines of code in like 10 microseconds or something or 10 milliseconds, just outrageously fast. Because it's broken down the language, it's figured out what you're asking for, and it's created the code to figure it out itself. And then it puts that code off into a little library just in case it needs it at some other time. And then just keeps going. And again, it's the same sort of thing. The more examples you have, the better it works, and it goes. So watch out for Viv. It's going to be very, very interesting.
I wanted to ask you, what, in your opinion, what you think the effects are going to be on the booking process for the guests,
Oh.
and how hoteliers can compete with something like that as far as the advertising and marketing aspects. Really, this thing's taking your own personal interests and
Right.
telling you what you want instead of the shopping process.
Absolutely. The killer hotel search, right, or travel search is, I'm getting married. We want to go on our honeymoon. Where should we go? Right? I mean, you're talking budget, experience, 2 individual people, what works best, all that sort of thing. The world is a thing, how much time they have. It will be able to answer questions like that. Now, the interesting tuning is going to be, does it answer the best? What is the best answer? Don't spend a lot of money. You're just getting married. You should be saving here. And don't go nuts on the honeymoon because that would be really foolish. Or, what the hell? You're getting married. This is going to be for life. And I don't know, right? That's, who knows?
The other thing I would add to that that's worth noting, we did a whole bunch of research on how people shop for travel, right? And you've all heard the stories about how many sites people visit and how much time people spend on travel. And you would think that they would hate that, right? You'd think, God, that's got to be annoying. And the fact is, most people love that. Most people who are spending that amount of time shopping for travel are doing it because it allows them to experience the journey before they ever get to go. So there will certainly be trips where it's going to be very appropriate for me to say, Alexa, which is what I talk to my Echo at home, book me a hotel for tonight in Chicago because I have to go out there for a business trip, and it will know enough of my preferences that it will say, here's where you should stay and here's your reservation. And then there are going to be other trips where it's the honeymoon or things along those lines where I'm going to look forward to spending that time. So I think it's something where you got to look at what is it that the guest actually wants, and when is it going to be appropriate for that to be true, and when is it going to be less appropriate?
Yeah, and in that case, it might be, like if it was a Facebook M sort of thing, they might kick that over, and they don't do it right now, but say, Wendy Perrin is a good friend of mine. She used to be the consumer news editor for Condé Nast Traveler, right? She now does a lot of work for TripAdvisor, but she has a group of the best travel agents who know the best destinations. They're destination-specific travel agents. So the person in Yellowstone National Park is a specialist. Her father was a ranger in Yellowstone National Park, knows everything about it, or Costa Rica, whatever it may be. They may tap into those people. The question's really going to be, what's the monetization process? What is the sourcing of that content for those individuals? So it may be, yes, there's marketing required, but how do you tap into those influencers to get their opinions and things like that. I mean, now it's sort of how do you deal with bloggers and are they legit or not? But I think there's going to be a lot of that because some of it will just be systemic and structural. Some of it will be expert opinions and that sort of thing. But that information is going to be available and with high levels of transparency, sort of thing.
So
So
you
it's
guys think it'll have more of an effect on things like business travel rather than leisure?
I think it's going to. I think it's going to depend on what's the lead time to book. I think it's going to depend on the nature of the trip. I think it's going to vary based on the specifics of the needs of that guest for that specific time. Certainly, business travel could be one of those, but you got to remember a lot of business travel. People do travel with other people. There's a lot of coordination. Some of that might happen behind the scenes, and some of that might be something where they can just do it by asking the question, and then other times it's going to actually want to take the time and sort it out.
But for
right? Meeting planners are going to still spend time figuring out where's the best place for the needs of that specific conference to hold a conference, for instance.
Yeah. But a lot of it, if you have your select list of preferred hotel providers, you've got all the duty care aspects and things like that the corporate travel managers have to do. Yeah, it's great. When I was at Sabre, I ran cars for a couple months between managers, and it was with Business Travel Solutions, right, when it was launching, and they were trying to figure out the car interface, and I said, well, why don't you just put a checkbox? I want fries with that. Because it basically is. You go, oh, it's a mid-tier management person. They get their intermediate car. They know it's with Hertz or Avis or whatever. It's like, check. And oh, yeah, that's good. Tested really well with the travel managers and the users. It was like, yeah, I need a car. And that was it. So all of a sudden, yeah, how do you merchandise it? It came down to, the teams at Avis versus Hertz versus Badger or whoever, negotiating with those guys to make sure they were on the list. So it just got picked.
Chris, how many questions you planning to ask?
There you go.
Yeah.
Your turn.
So we want to get to at least a second question here.
Tim's turn.
But really good stuff. What a shock that the agenda's in shambles already. Okay. So Tim, we had actually discussed a question for you too, very relevant to today's previous discussions, and that was to discuss what you consider to be an exciting digital trend and what it could mean for marketing local business, obviously hospitality focused.
Sure. So oddly enough, I have a slide or two prepared as well. But first I want to ask you a question. We've heard this term a bunch today. How many of you on your phones have Pokemon Go installed? Really, with all everybody talks about it, I would have thought every hand would have gone up, right? All right, another question. Show of hands, how many of you have Airbnb installed on your phone? Huh, interesting. Not every hand went up, right? So here's my question. How many of you have Facebook installed on your phones? Well, isn't that interesting? Right? Isn't that interesting? What I'm really excited about, what I think we need to be paying a lot of attention to, is the work that Facebook is doing. I'm not going to belabor this. I'm going to try to answer this in 100 words or less. And Robert and I are old friends. We do this every week. So what we want to talk about is, are you familiar with the idea of custom audiences? So custom audiences are things where you can say, I want to show ads to very specific people. For instance, and because laser pointers are cool, right? Specifically to people who've made it to a specific page within my booking engine. And I only want to show ads to those folks. Or I only want to show ads to lookalikes of people who've made it into my booking engine. Right? So I can customize and personalize, as Robert was just talking about, the actual content that I'm providing to them based on behaviors that I know actually lead to reservations. That's pretty slick, right? Obviously, are you all familiar with the concept of dynamic ads for travel? This is a new product. This requires a feed because it requires data. That's still being worked out. Right now it's in sort of it's out of beta, but it's not fully launched yet, where it gets things like your rates and inventory so that we can show dynamic ads that actually have rate and inventory information in them, again, to things like customized audiences. So we can say, hey, we were here before, we got a great deal for you, or we have a great package for you, we have a great promotion for you. That's awfully cool, right? Okay. Now here's where it gets even cooler. And this is something that today they don't do specifically for hotels, but it's coming. and that is store visits. They're doing this already in shops, where if people come into the shop, and how many of you have Facebook on your phone today? Right. Based on location, they can tell people who saw the ad and then were in the store, or saw the ad and then stayed in your rooms, right? Because the location tells them that that person, the ad actually had effect, right? That's unbelievably cool, because what's slick about that is that's actually tracking a conversion that today we have no idea happened, because it doesn't matter what channel they booked it through. So you're going to be able to find out, hey, did my Facebook ads actually drive people to book through my direct channel? Well, we know that right now, right? Okay, so did my Facebook ad cause them to book through the phone? Well, that's pretty cool. Or hey, did my Facebook ad cause them to book through an OTA? Well, that'd be interesting to know too, right? So we can actually determine the value of the advertising based on the behaviors that people take after they've been exposed to the advertising. And that's unbelievably cool. The other thing that's incredibly cool about it is Google's building all the same stuff, because they're terrified you're all going to take all your budgets and move it over to Facebook. So I'm actually incredibly impressed and incredibly thrilled in terms of where we're going to be just a few months from now, right? This exists today, and this sort of exists today, and we'll probably have it in the real world within the next couple of months. That, to me, as a local business, it doesn't matter whether you're branded or independent, suddenly gives you a lot of power to track the power of your advertising and your marketing in a way that we have not had the ability to do today. That's what gets me real excited.
So, go ahead.
Yeah.
Just to add one thing on that. Microsoft has the same thing, because it's all driven by a universal ad ID. Apple has the same thing, right? And who knows what will happen with Yahoo and Verizon and what I'm sure they'll come up with something. Since Verizon now has AOL and Yahoo, pretty certain they'll come up with something like that. But the big players, actually Amazon does as well. So the really big behemoth players all have this advertising tracker, which they have to use for their own businesses anyway, that they now share, and yeah, the big get bigger.
Yeah, we always look at it in terms of what I call AgFam, right? Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. As soon as one of them has it, another one will have it. And as soon as two of them have it, they all have it, because they have to be able to compete for the marketing dollars.
So you're enjoying Facebook, Google, new wave of competition, I guess, here. You see that coming.
Oh, for sure. I'll tell you, the Google I/O, not the Google I/O talk, the Google keynote that they did for AdWords specifically was one of the most fascinating keynotes I've ever seen Google present. Because literally the product managers from Google during that talk must have said, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 times throughout, only Google will be able to give you this power. Only Google can know this about your customer. Only Google can possibly blah, 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 blah. And what I heard them saying as subtext to all of that was, we're worried Facebook will. We're worried Facebook will. We're worried Facebook will. Because it literally is. Everything that they said only Google can do, Facebook is either announced or is working on. So yeah, they're going toe to toe. And when you think about the amount of time most people spend in Facebook versus the amount of time that most people spend on Google, Google has right to be concerned.
Okay, switch gears a little bit. It doesn't really matter who answers first. You can fight over it. Let's switch to paid marketing. What do you think? Is paid marketing increasing in importance to local businesses, and just in general, latest trends you've seen to better target potential customers on top of everything we've talked about today?
Yeah, I think paid is certainly increasing. It is something that we know is getting more expensive, but at the same time, we also are getting smarter at knowing whether or not it's working. Again, look at something like this. So it's more a question of as paid is increasing, We need to think more about attribution and understand the value that paid is actually driving back to the business. If you're spending a lot of money in paid, if your paid is increasing, but your occupancies are not, or your ADRs are not, I have a little hint for you. It's not working. If you are increasing your budget and you're also seeing things go up and filling more rooms and things along those lines, then you want to work on attribution to say, hey, what's actually happening here and how are we making this work?
Yeah, and you can look at, actually for both Expedia and Priceline, their advertising has now actually gotten more efficient. I think John had a stat there, it was like a couple billion. Actually, between the two of them, they spent 6.1 billion last year, predominantly on online channels for advertising. But their ad spend, it still is climbing, but they are getting better and better returns. So I think that's going to be what people see. As you get better tools, you'll be able to get better productivity. But again, if you get a better return on ad spend, that's value creation. So again, in a bid sort of environment, competitors will be willing to bid more. So yeah, the costs will probably go up, and any group that is offering value and creating that for free, if they have any sort of financial backers or venture capitalists or private equity behind them, they will be trying to unlock that value, convert that to shareholder value, so those prices will be going up.
And if I can add one quick thing to that, that is definitely a place, and I feel really bad about this, I forget who was talking about it before, but that's definitely a place where we need to get ownership, management companies, and brands aligned in terms of how they're actually valuing success. Because when we're talking about getting good return on spend, return is driven by what your goals are and how you're measuring success. If you're filling a lot of rooms but doing it at a terrible yield, your return on spend is going to be crap. So you really got to get those things lined up.
So just following on just a little bit, maybe a little bit more detail for the audience, specifically relative to digital marketing, key performance indicators, what are you guys telling hoteliers these days?
Return on spend, return on spend, return on spend. Where are you? What's your trend line for return on spend? Looking at, I think it's interesting the numbers that were presented before in terms of 6-to-1 return on spend or 2-to-1 return on spend, depending on channel. That's great, but drive those higher. Drive them higher still, because it can be done. It's hard, it's work, but it's worth doing. Because every extra dollar you get there, particularly if it's an extra dollar in ADR, drops right to your bottom line, right? I mean, this is what you need to be doing to say we got to focus on that. To do that, you want to look at the kinds of things that are, I hate the term KPI. I hate the term KPI. I realize that's kind of weird, but most people look at KPIs that are backwards looking. They tell you what happened, but not what's going to happen. And they have like 30 of them. If you have 30 key performance indicators, you don't have any. You need to focus on the things that are actually predictive of where we're going to be. So look to things like bounce rate. Look to things like time on site. Look to things like repeat visits. Focus it by channel, make it segmented, make it actionable, make it timely, so that you're actually taking action that drives increased revenues. And those are the kinds of KPIs that I'd be looking at and the kinds of things that I'm advising my clients that we need to be focused on heavily.
Yeah, there are going to be some new metrics that Cindy Estes Green has her Calibri thing. The distribution report will be coming out soon, and she's been working with AH&LA and a lot of the major hotel brands. I don't know the exact acronym for it. The one's called a COPE formula. I can't remember what it stands for, quite honestly, but it really gets down to like net achieved revenue yield, right? Of figuring in all of your channel costs, all of your transaction costs, your advertising, all the way down to the bottom, the bottom line. And that's where the alignment's really important between the brands, the management companies, and the owners, to really understand these costs, because right now, frankly, it's a mess. You've got a number of hotel brands I talked to, especially with this channel optimization thing, it's actually been a little bit distressing, because you hear the war between the OTAs and the brands, and the number of brands who just go, we love working with the OTAs because it's zero ad spend for us and all the cost is borne by the hotel. And you kind of look at it and go, oh, that's probably not, and you certainly understand why they do that, because that, is it's a business model, right, for their to generate their bottom line. But overall, accretively for the industry, maybe not the best thing. So I look at this sort of formula where you're really drilling down to the bottom, where all of a sudden that's going to start exposing some of these costs. Where, again, if you're a Hilton Garden Inn, you're paying on average 14.9% of total room revenue to Hilton, which is a lot of money. When people complain about 15% booking.com for just what's produced, right? So and then when you start layering all these things on top for individual advertising, it gets very ugly.
I'm the guy who worked at brands. I'm willing to fight this one. No, no, but real quick, first off, Robert's absolutely right. We want to look at some of those new trends, but certainly you should be thinking about things like ProPAR. I mean, that profit per available room is not a new metric by any stretch, but it's way underutilized. Now, most of you folks in the room, I bet, are marketers or digital marketers or e-commerce folks, yeah, right? How often do you talk to your rev management folks, right? Because one of the things that needs to happen better is we need to break down those silos so that we're thinking more closely about actually driving profitable revenue instead of just filling rooms. With regard to the whole brand versus OTA, I think that's a silly fight. I really do. I genuinely do. Brands aren't designed to do what OTAs are designed to do, right? OTAs are a channel for acquiring guests. Brands, in theory, if they're a good brand, do a lot more than that. Now, there are plenty of hotels that don't need a flag, and there are plenty of hotels that today have flags, won't need them next year. That's a fact. At the same time, how many of you have had to go to the bank to get financing to open up a new property? And how many of you would be able to do that without a brand, right? Things like that actually still carry weight in terms of backing, right? Things like the technology stack that is provided by many brands. Things like volume purchasing that is provided by many brands. That does not mean that all the brands are going to survive. We've already seen Starwood fall, and they're the first domino in the chain. We're going to end up with a couple of brand holding companies standing, and we're going to end up with the OTAs, is my suspicion. But the reality, and we're going to end up with an Airbnb, right? But that's the way it's going to work out, because that's the way it's worked out in industry after industry after industry over the last bunch of years. But there's still a lot of properties where brands make a lot of sense. I used to sell Super 8. Most Super 8s would not survive as independents. Not because they're bad hotels, but because if you're driving down the freeway at night and you need to figure out where's the best place to stay, someplace clean and friendly that you can trust being clean and friendly is a good place to go. And that's not going to change anytime soon.
And good niche brands too. I mean,
yeah,
for independents,
sure.
things like that. I mean, if you can really create value for the customer, right? Because I kind of look at it. It's not lodging. If you just want to have somebody stay in a room and you're just selling a bed in a box, sort of thing, that's fine. There's some sort of number that's that rate. But if you want to get something above that, you have to provide services or personalization or something better, right? And so and if you can have brands that go and do that, and there will be other niche sort of brands, but again, it's just tricky for those guys to compete against the real behemoths who have serious money. And you start looking at situations like the airline industry where there aren't that many players. Well, why? Because the big guys didn't play nice with the little guys. And that will probably start happening.
Okay, guys, maybe one more question, and then we'll see if there's any quick questions from the audience and go from there.
Quick questions aren't the problem. Quick answers are.
Yeah,
Right.
Complicated stuff.
True and false works really well.
Nice shot.
So,
What digital threats to the hospitality business? What do you worry about on behalf of the folks in the room?
the biggest digital threat is losing the vision of hospitality, because that is what separates the differential of those experiences. I was speaking with the general manager of a flagship resort for one of the major groups a couple weeks ago. He said, apologies to any revenue managers in the room. And he's been around a long time, former Four Seasons colleague. The guy's tremendous, right? He was general manager of the year for this major brand. He said, worst thing that's ever happened in the hotel industry to revenue managers. It's like, whoa, that's a pretty strong statement. But his point was, they don't look at guests, they look at numbers, and it's completely focused on the performance of the hotel for the owners and that sort of thing, and it doesn't matter with the guests. It's not like, oh, you know what, we should give these guys a little bit of a break, create value for them, that will create good. It's no, how do you optimize your revenue? How do you get the last nickel? Really, again, it's the airline industry model, which is a problem. I mean, if you look at, J.D. Power and Associates, Rick Garlick had some great stats. Every time an individual interacts with an airline employee, a traveler interacts with an airline employee, the level of satisfaction with that airline decreases. Every
Southwest? Southwest?
This was for the entire industry, but every time, on average, if there's more interaction with a hotel employee, satisfaction increases. So all the things to kind of take the labor cost out of the P&L, that's okay. That's fine. The finance guys go, that's great. This is more efficient. People don't want to talk to anybody checking in. It's not they don't want to talk to people checking in. They don't want to talk to people who are only interested in accomplishing something that benefits the hotel, like getting your credit card or doing so, or upselling you on something that you probably don't want. All that sort of stuff is horrible. If you can walk up to the desk and they go, yeah, what can we do to help you know about the area? You need any tips of what to do for dinner or something like that? Something that's really helpful that will help them accomplish the goal of their trip. That's golden. I mean, for all the websites, or either on the website, for follow-up, confirmation emails, pre-arrival emails, please ask the guests why they're traveling. And all of a sudden, you get a bunch of insight first you get an exchange and engagement with them, but all of that insight you can then do something with and help them have a better experience. If you do that, then that's what hospitality is. The other thing of just shuffling people into the rooms and trying to get, extract as much out of their wallet as they can, that's a different kind of business.
Right. How many of you have heard of Alice? Do you know Alice? Right, it's a tool for when guests have complaints. Alice is a logging system, is all it is, right? But it's a place where anybody in the hotel or the guest can actually log a complaint, and then it's, tracks that complaint gets serviced, right? But here's the crazy thing about Alice. Alice actually, the Alice software, pings people when the guest hasn't been serviced within a certain amount of time. And if the guest's complaint hasn't been resolved in 30 minutes, somebody at Alice calls the hotel to find somebody to fix the guest's problem, right? What business are we in, folks? At that point, you're real estate. That's all you are. You've outsourced the fundamental thing that we do. And when we talk about personalization, and when we talk about the fact that we have these services and we're all carrying, I use a line very similar to Banu's all the time. Nobody goes online. They are online, right? And when I can get a set of personalized services delivered to me on my watch or on my phone or on my tablet, wherever I happen to be, that say, you know what, don't bother go talking to the concierge. Here's the restaurant that you want to go to that meets your needs. Or, hey, don't worry about going to the concierge. Let me go ahead and get tickets for that show that I know you were looking at, and all that other kind of stuff. And it's happening before somebody ever talks to anyone in your property. And it's powered by Booking.com or Expedia, who are all building this right now. You're in the real estate business. That is the fundamental digital threat to hotels today. You want to actually survive? Take care of the guest. If you have to outsource to somebody else to say whether or not you're doing good service, you're doing something very, very wrong.
And just so you know, Alice, one of the lead investors in Alice is Expedia. Sort of thing. So, yeah, and by the hotel brands all going asset light, where they, again, Wall Street pretty much dictated it, for their returns and looking for, increasing shareholder value. That's fine and good, but all of a sudden, when you don't manage the hotels, you don't own the hotels, that suddenly you're removed a little bit from the operation, and that's a challenge. I'm doing a project right now on high-speed internet standards and the gap between what guests want to stream their Netflix and what hotels actually provide.
Number one amenity that guests want. Number one.
I'm trying
What,
to
how, number one amenity.
Yeah.
How many of you have stayed in a hotel lately where the high-speed internet was crap?
Yeah.
Come on, put them up. More of you have, right?
It's a super business to be in if you have a good high-speed system to sell. It's a super
Yeah,
business to be in.
exactly.
Because it is absolutely the number one amenity guests ask for today.
And I'm trying to get Focusrite to ask this question. They probably won't, but I really want them to ask, would you rather have good high-speed internet or hot water or a clean room? Or just to really kind of put it under the...
This has actually been asked. TripAdvisor
did
a study. TripAdvisor has done a study and found that at least of a certain age or younger, but it's not millennials, I think it's millennial mindset again, would rather have Wi-Fi than clean clothes with them on their trip.
That said, you all look fine today. Not to worry.
Clean clothes are different from a clean room, though.
Well, that's true. Absolutely.
Any, yes, Venu.
So, Robert, you had written an article on bots and messengers and everything, and I had followed that. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening with messaging
Sure.
and bots and impact on our industry?
Yeah, I mean, lots of groups are playing around with Facebook, and again, they've opened their API for Messenger for automation, right? So again, if you get certain signals, you can produce code that will go do certain things. The best example that I've seen just outside of hospitality is Uber, right? How many people have the Uber app on their phone? Wow. So you wouldn't really think Uber. I mean, people already have the app and everything. Why do they need it? Uber runs in the Facebook Messenger environment. Everything you can, request one. You can see it on the map. It will settle it. Does everything the Uber standalone native app does, but within Facebook Messenger. You don't need the Uber app anymore if you have Messenger, right? So pretty revolutionary difference. And for a group like Uber going, oh my, they of all people would do that. Outrageously powerful because you got 150 or 1.5 billion daily users on it, right? So what's happening is, and my recommendation for the hotel industry is, things start with the easy stuff, the really obvious, simple questions that you know. Somebody comes to what you want to be able to check in on the hotel. Yes, you have their guest room, especially if you already know who they are or something like that, and they don't have to type in their 16-character confirmation number and all that sort of stuff with their thumbs, which is awful. Yeah, come in if you can recognize them. Pal, would you like to check in? Yes, this is great. Would you like this room? That perfect. Those are the really simple, quote, really simple things to do from a user interface perspective. A little bit of plumbing on the back end to make sure that happens, right? But those sorts of questions are great. Do you need a wake-up call? Things like that. You can do certain things relatively easily within the Facebook environment. And the key is, what are the experiences for someone in hotel, predominantly in destination, visiting the property, that really simplify their trip, that can be done very simply. It's a simple question. It's a simple answer. You don't need them to wait for a staff member to call the phone. Just give them the answer right away. And
if I can add a couple quick things to this, the first thing to realize is, one of the reasons that Facebook is doing this and one of the reasons Uber is doing this is most people open 4 apps, right? They open Facebook, they open Google, they open YouTube, and they open either text or WhatsApp or some sort of messaging app, period. That's it. They never go to the other apps. Most of your customers won't be using apps at some point in the future. I don't know if it's going to be 3 years or 5 years or what the number is, but they're going to do it within a messaging context. And Robert hit it exactly on the head a moment ago. This is about experience, right? I'm gonna say something that Banu is going to beat me up for later, but from my perspective, it is not mobile first. It is customer first, right? Messaging just happens to be the coming way that we're going to service the needs of the guest. And you should have a mobile website, because the moment that they get the answer to the question and they need something more information, then they're going to click the link and make sure that they get over to the mobile website, but they're not going to open your app. They're going to do it within Facebook or whatever their messaging platform is.
And even the customer first, that sort of thing. I mean, Google, I think was it 2010, declared that they were going mobile first, right? So it's not necessarily a new concept. This past February, CEO announced they're AI first. They're now an AI-first company. So kind of going back to those slides. So we're going, but it's all about the customer, and Google stands behind the don't be evil. Here's what the users want. They want answers right away, as simply and frictionless as possible. They want to do it. How do you give them that information? Google's goal was always organizing the world's information, right? And that's what they're working on. It's just, how do you guys work within that environment to really make it cost effective on your side, and to control the interaction and your engagement with the guests.
Anyone want to be the one person who we can squeeze a question in from? Yes, sir. Oh, come on.
That's okay.
Two questions.
There are two of us.
It's going to
There are two
cost
of us. We'll
you,
each
it's cost
answer
you twice
one.
as
We'll
much.
each answer one.
Thank you. I work for a small hotel chain based out of Cabo San Lucas in Mexico.
Pueblo Bonito.
So, sí, señor. Very good. So my question is, in the US, a typical hotel, either brand or not, what is the percentage of revenues captured by direct bookings today?
Percentage of revenues for direct bookings?
Yeah, in their
For
webpage.
a chain or for an independent?
Either, or both. If you have both statistics, even better.
For the percentage of revenues.
Yeah, the challenge with that question, the challenge with that question is that the average doesn't take into account the standard deviation, right? It doesn't take into account the variation. I have independent hotels who I work with who get 70% of their bookings direct. I have independent properties that I work with who get 20% of their bookings direct. And that's true at the chain level as well. There's a wide range. I'll give you a real world example. It used to be the Ramada New Yorker. It is now the Wyndham New Yorker, right? But right across the street from Penn Station in New York, on the back side, not Hotel Pennsylvania, but the one on the other side, the 8th Avenue side. They get most of their business comes from OTA and things along those lines because of their location. They sell the thing out so fast it's not even funny, right? Someplace in a secondary market or a tertiary market is going to have a much wider range from that perspective. So it's very, very hard to answer that right, because it's all over the place.
And even for the chains, what they count as direct bookings can be it may go direct to the hotel. Everything through the sales office, which may be a negotiated corporate rate that comes through a GDS or through a travel agency, that's often, for some it's a separate channel and it's GDS. Some of it, they pop straight into direct. So it's,
All right, and then the second one question is, people who book a beach resort out of the country, what percentage, online obviously, what percentage of those people will book in hotel only, and what percentage would book hotel with air as a package?
For all inclusives, back to my
Either.
Mark
All-inclusives or not, just
Mark
beach
travel
resort.
days.
I'm going to yield to Robert on this one. This gets much more into your former world with Mark Travel than mine.
It depends on the thing. I mean, for the major groups like Mark Travel, Apple Vacations, they generate a lot, hundreds of thousands, millions of passengers into Mexico. And so in some cases, the wholesale channel is 70%, 80% of the business. And it's huge. It's again all over the map. I mean, there's some and I'm sure for Pueblo Bonito, who we send a lot of business to, had a very strong connection, very high awareness in Southern California, right? Was getting a lot of direct business and doing some really good things there. But outside of that market, really didn't have much of a presence. So a lot of it really comes down to reach of the total market. A lot of it for the resorts is airlift as well, which is a huge consideration of what comes in. But generally what's been happening is a lot of OTAs have been coming in heavily into that market, and the combination for air and hotel, I would say, and I write the packaging chapter for Focusrite, I should know this stuff off the top of my head, but I would say, I would say in many cases the package combination is probably for those resorts 25%, something like that is probably, if you average it around.
Yeah, and if you're talking about direct business and things along those lines, I would come at it from a slightly different perspective, which is what do you want it to be and how much are you willing to spend to make it get there? I mean, fundamentally, if we're talking about return on spend and things along those lines, set your goals and make sure you're working towards those. And if you're not seeing the progress, change the tactics, right?
The one thing with packages that happens very effectively, though, is the communicating the savings. And because what happens is it enables the travelers to feel that they're getting a discount on their airfare, when really the discount's coming from the hotel on a net rate. So all of a sudden it's like book your air and hotel together, and in many cases, wow, we saved $200, and that's crazy. We're saving on the airfare, and because they can't find other rates that are lower, and that's what it is. So that's a huge business. Expedia, for some reason, and I don't know why, hasn't put the packaging back into their affiliate networks, and it's been down since 2012 when they re-platformed their entire infrastructure, right? $750 million unifying their platforms, and that has not yet happened yet. And I'm not sure if that's a strategic decision or a plumbing issue, but
Because it wasn't profitable for them.
yeah.
To have that department, it wasn't profitable for them.
Yeah, it wasn't as
Well, I
profitable as
suspect-
the other departments.
I used to sell luxury packages when I worked at Leading. We did a lot of this kind of package stuff, but we were taking consolidated fares and packaging, and it's exactly what you just said. What we found was true, at least in that segment specifically, that's why I don't generally speak about it broadly, was what most of the packages did was generate call volume for people to then go ahead and put together a custom package. So that could be where they're not being profitable. We almost never sold the packages we advertised. We sold a ton of packages, but it almost all happened over voice.
Tim, 45 seconds max on the BLABcast, please.
Yeah, so every Friday, a group of industry experts, I guess you call us, Robert Cole. Well, we always joke there are four of us on the BLABcast, and we always joke that it should be called Three Smart Guys, and you decide which of us are those three that week. But Robert Cole, me, Lauren Gray from Hospitality Digital Marketing, and Ed St. Onge, who is currently with Flip2 and actually founded Easy Yield. Talk about industry news, talk about industry trends, talk about whatever happens to be on our mind. It is at blab.im. We can get you the link to that, but it's blab.im. It's also on Facebook if you look at the Hospitality Digital Marketing page. Please do join us. It's got a live chat on the right-hand side. It runs anywhere from about 30 minutes to about 2 hours, depending on how much warmed up we get that particular day. But it's a lot of fun, and we talk about all kinds of interesting topics. And when one of us can't make it, we're always asking people to join in who are just attending. So please do join blab.im. We'll get you the full link later.
It's kind of a Brady Bunch type where there are 4 boxes and
Yeah.
you can talk back and forth.
Brady Bunch.
Going back to one of the other questions, what are your guys' thoughts on Snapchat?
I think Snapchat, so I think that all social networks will look like Snapchat within the next 2 years. Whether or not Snapchat is going to be the one that actually wins or not, very tough to tell. The experience is incredibly immersive. Facebook is already saying that they expect their feed to be 100% video within the next 5 years. They are already seeing a decline in the consumption of text within the news feed. So I think we're going to see that the web as we know it in a text-based format is going to get diminished, and it's going to become increasingly visual. Snapchat certainly has got a great market share amongst its audience and the like, but it's really struggling to get the olds to join. And I suspect when they do, the youngs will go, laters. So, I suspect Snapchat as a product is going to either be the Twitter of the future or is going to get snapped up by somebody, no pun intended. But the way the experience works, I think, is what a lot of social is going to look like in the not too distant future.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. I have 2 daughters, 18 and 26. A vast majority of their conversations happen on Snapchat now. My wife, who is really not that technically savvy, loves it. I mean, absolutely. Talks, constantly sending messages back and forth. She doesn't have a lot of her friends who are on it, but constantly talking to daughters. If her friends were on it, she would use that certainly more, and her Facebook utilization has dropped versus Snapchat. So
Remember always,
Real time.
technology is hereditary. We get it from our kids.
exactly.
Okay, guys, in keeping with our theme of digital excellence for the day, you were excellent panelists. Thank you very much.